They banned barbecues on a Tuesday, not because anyone had been hurt, not because a fire had started, not because a single neighbor had filed a written complaint about smoke or noise or anything that a reasonable person would describe as a problem. They banned barbecues because Miriam Foss had been HOA president for 7 months and had run out of smaller things to control, and a barbecue ban was the next item on a list that nobody had asked her to make. The notice arrived in every mailbox on Crestfield Lane on a Wednesday morning, printed on the new HOA letterhead she had designed in her second week. A house inside a wreath that looked like the logo of a company that sold scented candles. And it said that effective immediately all open-flame cooking devices, including but not limited to charcoal grills, propane grills, smokers, and portable fire pits were prohibited from use on all residential lots within the Crestfield Commons HOA boundaries due to fire safety liability and neighborhood aesthetic concerns. Aesthetic concerns. I read that phrase 3 times standing at my mailbox in the June morning sun. I had a Weber kettle I had owned for 14 years, a propane smoker I had built from a kit with my son the summer before he left for college, and a cast iron griddle setup that my wife Renata had given me for my 48th birthday, and that I had used every Sunday morning since. I also had a property surveyor's plat of my lot, a copy of the Crestfield Commons HOA Declaration of Covenants, a neighbor named August Ferreira, who was a land use attorney, and the specific knowledge that my back patio extended 14 feet past the HOA boundary line as recorded with the county. Miriam Foss had banned barbecues inside the HOA. She had not banned barbecues on my back patio. Those were 2 different places, and I was going to make sure 100 people understood the difference on the Saturday of the 4th of July weekend, with every grill I owned running at full capacity. But before I tell you what that cookout cost Miriam in standing, in authority, and in the series of overreaches that followed and collapsed one after another over the next 4 months, let me tell you about the kind of person who bans backyard barbecues and describes it as a neighborhood aesthetic concern. My name is Desmond Price. I am 51 years old. I spent 23 years in commercial construction project management before transitioning to independent consulting 3 years ago. My wife Renata is a physical therapist who runs a small practice in our town of Harcourt Falls, Georgia. We have 2 children. Our son Tomas is finishing his junior year at Georgia Tech. Our daughter Petra is in her 2nd year at a performing arts high school in Atlanta and lives with my sister during the week. 9 years ago, Renata and I bought our house at 14 Crestfield Lane, a 4-bedroom craftsman on a 0.4-acre lot in Crestfield Commons, a 78-home planned residential community in the eastern part of Harcourt Falls. The HOA governed the community through a declaration of covenants, conditions, and restrictions recorded with Fulton County at the time of development. Monthly dues were $210. The HOA managed common area landscaping, community pool maintenance, entry feature upkeep, and enforcement of the CC and RS. What made our lot relevant to everything that followed was a fact I had discovered in year 2 of living there, not because I suspected anything would ever matter about it, but because I was a project manager by profession and reading site documents was something I did the way other people read the news. The HOA boundary as recorded in the original development plat did not perfectly align with the rear property lines of the lots on the south side of Crestfield Lane. Specifically, the HOA boundary ran along a line that was 14 feet inside the rear property boundary of my lot and 7 of my immediate neighbors' lots. The land between the HOA boundary and our actual property lines was ours. It was inside our deeded property. It was outside the HOA's jurisdiction. I had confirmed this with a licensed surveyor in year 3 and had the stamped survey plat in my files. I had mentioned it to August Ferreira over a fence conversation about 4 years ago. He had looked at my plat and said, "That is a clean 14 feet. That is interesting. We had not discussed it since because there had been no reason to discuss it. There was a reason now. The board president before Miriam Foss was a man named Gerald HOA. Retired high school principal, 68 years old, had lived at Crestfield Commons for 12 years and ran the HOA with the philosophy that the CC and RS existed to maintain reasonable community standards and not to extend the board's preferences into residents' private lives. Gerald was fair, responsive, and boring in precisely the way that a good HOA president should be boring. Meetings ran 40 minutes. Enforcement actions were rare and targeted actual violations. Dues were managed carefully, and the reserve fund was healthy. Gerald's wife took a position in Savannah, and they moved to be together. He resigned by email, thanked the community, said goodbye. Miriam Foss announced her candidacy within 10 days. She was 55, former compliance officer for a regional banking group in Charlotte, had moved to Crestfield Commons 18 months earlier following her divorce. She ran on a platform of raising community standards, improving property values through stricter CC and R enforcement, and bringing professional governance practices to what she described as an overly informal HOA structure. She won by 11 votes. 3 of those votes came from homeowners on the north side of the street, who would later tell me they had not understood what professional governance practices meant in practice and wished they had asked more questions before the election. Her first 6 months produced a flurry of enforcement notices across the community. 3 homeowners cited for lawn height violations that had not previously been cited because Gerald measured with judgment rather than a ruler. 2 homeowners cited for fence paint colors that were within the approved palette but at the lighter end of it. One homeowner, my neighbor Beatrice Osai, 72, cited for a wind chime she had owned for 6 years that Miriam had determined constituted a noise-generating exterior accessory not approved under the architectural guidelines. Beatrice had taken the wind chime down. She had told me while taking it down that she had owned that chime since her late husband gave it to her, and that she had complied because she did not have the energy for a fight, but that she wanted me to know she thought the whole thing was wrong. I told her I thought so too. The barbecue ban was item 7 on the June board meeting agenda. I was not at that meeting because I had not been watching the agenda closely enough, and by the time Sylvia Dunmore, who lived 4 houses down, and attended every board meeting because she had been on the original founding committee and felt an obligation to, texted me at 8:14 in the evening to say they had just banned all open flame cooking on residential lots. The vote had already been taken, 4-1. Gerald's one remaining ally on the board, a man named Raymond Cho, had voted against. Miriam's 4 allies had voted for. The motion had been seconded by a woman named Patricia Vance, who had moved into the community 6 months ago, and had apparently decided in that time that enforcing other people's cooking choices was a reasonable use of her first elected position. I read Sylvia's text. Then I called August Ferreira. He answered on the second ring. I said they banned barbecues. He said I heard. Sylvia is efficient. I said I want to hold a cookout on the 4th of July weekend. On my back patio. He said the 14 feet. I said yes. He said when did you last have that survey plat stamped? I said year 3, 2018. He said get it re-stamped this week. County records are what they are, but a fresh stamp is cleaner for what you have in mind. I said, what do I have in mind? He said, a cookout that is legal, documented, thoroughly attended, and impossible for Miriam to reach. I said yes. He said, I will bring the brisket. I said, you are invited. The surveyor re-stamped my plat on Thursday. I had it in hand by Friday afternoon, the boundary line clear, the 14 feet of my back patio beyond the HOA jurisdiction line undeniable on paper signed by a licensed professional. I spent Friday evening and Saturday morning doing 2 things. First, I verified that the Georgia HOA Act, Official Code of Georgia annotated 443220 through 443235, limited HOA enforcement authority to property within the boundaries established by the recorded declaration and plat. My back patio, outside the HOA boundary, was outside that enforcement authority. Second, I invited everyone I knew who lived in or near Harcourt Falls to a 4th of July cookout at 14 Crestfield Lane, specifically described in the invitation as occurring on the back patio, which is located outside the Crestfield Commons HOA jurisdiction boundary. I sent the invitation to 140 people. I specified bring a dish. I would provide all the meat, BYOB, starting at noon on Saturday, July 2nd. I also sent a certified letter to Miriam Foss and the full board on Monday before the cookout. The letter informed the board that I intended to hold a private social gathering on my residential property on July 2nd. It noted that the gathering would take place on the portion of my lot that lay outside the HOA boundary as established by the recorded development plat and confirmed by a licensed surveyor's restamped plat, which was attached. It noted that open flame cooking on private property outside HOA jurisdiction was not subject to HOA CC and R enforcement regardless of any board resolution. It noted that all cooking and gathering activities would comply fully with Harcourt Falls Municipal Fire Code, Fulton County Noise Ordinances, and all applicable law. It invited the board to review the attached survey plat. It was signed by me and countersigned by August Ferreira, identifying himself as an attorney of record for the property owner. August told me afterward that he could not prove what happened when Miriam read that letter, but that based on the phone calls he had received from 2 board members in the 48 hours following delivery, he was reasonably confident she had read it at least twice and had not enjoyed either reading. July 2nd, Saturday, noon. I fired up the Weber at 11:15. The propane smoker had been running since 7 in the morning with 2 pork shoulders that had been in the dry rub since Thursday night. The cast iron griddle setup was running at the patio's east edge. Renata had made 3 pounds of her family's potato salad, which had been the subject of a standing argument among our friends for 9 years about whether it was the best potato salad anyone had ever had, with the argument being resolved consistently in its favor by everyone who tasted it. I had 100 pounds of meat, 60 pounds of sides, a cooler situation that August had organized with the systematic efficiency of a man who had spent 20 years managing complex litigation and applied the same project management energy to cooler logistics. 94 people showed up, 94 of the 140 I had invited, plus 6 people those guests brought, totaling an even 100 by 1:30 in the afternoon. My back patio, my yard beyond it, and the 14 feet of legally mine and jurisdictionally free space between the HOA boundary and my rear property line were full of people eating barbecue that smelled like the specific combination of hickory smoke and dry rub, and rendered fat that is the correct smell for a July afternoon in Georgia, and cannot be replicated by any cooking method that does not involve fire. Miriam Foss appeared at my front door at 1:55. I know the exact time because my doorbell camera has a timestamp, and I reviewed the footage that evening with the specific pleasure of someone who had anticipated this moment and was glad to find it exactly as anticipated. She knocked. I went to the door. She was holding a printed copy of the barbecue ban resolution and the look of someone who had prepared a speech and was committed to delivering it. She said, "Mr. Price, you are in violation of the board's June resolution prohibiting open flame cooking on residential lots within Crestfield Commons." I said, "Good afternoon, Miriam." She said, "This is a formal notice of violation and you are required to extinguish all open flame cooking devices immediately." I said, "I appreciate you coming by. I want to make sure we are working from the same information." I held up the survey plat. I said, "This is a restamped survey plat prepared by a licensed Georgia surveyor confirming that my back patio and the cooking area currently in use are located outside the Crestfield Commons HOA boundary, as recorded with Fulton County. Outside the boundary means outside the board's enforcement jurisdiction under the Georgia HOA Act." She looked at the plat. Then she looked past me toward the patio where 94 people and 100 pounds of meat were doing exactly what they were doing. She said, "This is not what the plat shows." I said, "You are welcome to have your own surveyor review the document." August Ferreira, who had appeared behind my left shoulder in the way that land use attorneys appear when they have anticipated being needed, said, "The plat is stamped and filed with Fulton County. If you have questions about its accuracy, you are welcome to commission a competing survey at the board's expense." Miriam looked at August. She looked at the plat. She looked at the cookout. She said, "This is not over." I said, "I hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon." I closed the door. Behind me, through the kitchen window, I could see 94 people continuing to enjoy themselves on property that was legally and documentably outside Miriam Foss's reach. She sent a violation notice by certified mail on Monday. Fine, $350, unauthorized open flame cooking device operation in violation of board resolution dated June 14th. I forwarded it to August. He called me that evening. He said, "She fined you for cooking on property outside her jurisdiction." I said, "Yes." He said, "That fine is not just invalid. Attempting to fine a homeowner for activity on property outside HOA jurisdiction may constitute an overreach of authority under Georgia law that creates personal liability for the board member who authorized it." I said, "I know." He said, "How do you want to handle this?" I said, "I want to contest the fine formally. I want to request the full HOA financial records because Irene Sandoval, who had been Gerald's treasurer, had called me the previous week to say the quarterly reports had stopped coming in March, and she thought that was worth noticing. And I want to understand exactly what Miriam has been doing with the budget since January." August said, "Contest letter and records request go out tomorrow." I said, "And I want to plan the August cookout." He said, "I will bring the ribs this time." The contest letter and financial records request went out Tuesday morning. August's letter was precise. The fine was issued for activity conducted on property outside HOA jurisdiction. Georgia HOA Enforcement Authority is limited to property within the recorded boundaries of the association. The attached survey plat, stamped by a licensed surveyor and recorded with Fulton County, establishes that the cooking area in question is outside those boundaries. The fine is void. Additionally, the board's June resolution prohibiting open flame cooking may itself be unenforceable as applied to property outside HOA boundaries, and potentially overreaching as applied to property within HOA boundaries, given that open flame cooking for personal use on private residential property is not among the uses restricted by the original CC and RS adopted at development. Full financial records requested. All documents, contracts, minutes, bank statements, reserve fund records 24 months. Georgia HOA statute requires production within 30 days. Response required. Miriam's response came through a property management consultant she had apparently hired, a company called Preferred Community Management, at $1,400 per month beginning in February, which I noted because I had not known about any management consultant, and that was not a small monthly expense for a 78-home HOA. The response argued that the board had authority to adopt reasonable rules for health and safety within the community, and that the survey plat question would need to be verified by the board's own surveyor. It offered to rescind the fine if I agreed not to hold further cookouts pending a comprehensive review of the community's open flame policy. August replied the same day. "We will not agree to any restriction on lawful activity on private property outside HOA jurisdiction as a condition of rescinding a fine that was void when it was issued. We look forward to the board's own surveyor confirming what the attached county-recorded plat already shows, and we note that no arrangement regarding future activity will be made under the threat of an invalid fine." The financial records arrived 28 days after the request, 2 days before the deadline, 289 pages, printed single-sided on standard paper, organized with the thoroughness of someone who had worked in compliance for a regional bank, and understood that the appearance of completeness could function as a first line of defense against examination. It did not function that way against Irene Sandoval. Irene had been Gerald's treasurer for 6 years and had a natural feel for HOA finances that came from managing her own small business for 20 years alongside the volunteer role. She came to my kitchen table on a Saturday morning with her own notes from the prior 3 years' reports, and we went through the box the way you go through financial documents when you suspect they are not saying what they appear to be saying, which is to say slowly, with sources, and with the patience that accuracy requires. By early afternoon, Irene had found what she was looking for. Gerald had left the reserve fund at $96,000. Current balance, $47,000. $9,000 had moved in 11 months. Legitimate expenses she could account for against the operating budget, $31,000, landscaping contracts, pool maintenance, common area repairs, insurance renewal, all properly documented with invoices. The remaining $18,000 had moved through 2 structures. First, the preferred community management contract, $1,400 monthly from February through the current month, 8 months, $11,200, with an attached scope of services document that described deliverables Irene said were either things Gerald's board had done internally at no cost or things she could not find any evidence of having been delivered. Second, a series of 4 payments between $800 and $1,900 described as Community Standards Consulting. Total $6,200. No vendor name in the payment records. No invoices. No meeting minutes approving the expenditure. I pulled up the Georgia Secretary of State Business Registry on my laptop. Preferred Community Management LLC. Registered 13 months ago. 2 months before Miriam took office. Owner of record, Miriam Elaine Foss. She had incorporated the management company before she was elected and begun contracting it to the HOA within 6 weeks of taking office. 8 months of payments at $1,400 per month. $11,200 to her own company. Georgia law on HOA board member conflicts of interest. Official Code of Georgia annotated 143860, required disclosure of any financial interest in entities receiving HOA funds. She had disclosed nothing. The 4 community standards consulting payments, $6,200, Irene traced through a cross-reference she found by matching payment dates to calendar printout in the executive session minutes that Miriam had included in the record's production without apparently realizing what it contained. Each payment date corresponded to a meeting with an entity called Foss Property Solutions. I searched the Georgia Registry. Foss Property Solutions, LLC. Owner, Daniel Foss. Age, 29. Prior address, Charlotte, North Carolina. Current address, same as Miriam's address in Harcourt Falls. Her son. She had been paying herself and her son from the reserve fund, while banning her neighbors' BBQs and fining them for wind chimes and lawn height measurements. The specific combination of those facts sat in my kitchen for a moment with Irene on one side of the table and me on the other, and neither of us said anything, because sometimes the right response to information is to let it fully arrive before you start talking about what to do with it. Then Irene said, Gerald built that reserve fund for 6 years. $1 at a time. She said it the way she said things she needed to make sure were understood. I said, I know. She said, what does August need? I said, everything you have found, sourced, and organized. She said, I will have it ready by Monday. She was ready Sunday afternoon. August filed Monday morning. Complaint to the Georgia HOA Regulatory Division. Financial self-dealing. Undisclosed conflicts of interest. Violation of Official Code of Georgia annotated 143860. Simultaneously, complaint to the Georgia Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division. Same documentation with a specific brief characterizing the conduct as potential theft by deception under Georgia Code 1683. The Regulatory Division acknowledged receipt and notified the Crestfield Commons Board of an open inquiry Wednesday morning. I organized the community meeting for Thursday evening at Beatrice Osai's home. Beatrice had a back porch large enough for 30 people, and a dining room that could hold another 20 with the table moved, and had said yes before I finished asking, because she had taken down a wind chime she had owned for 6 years, and she had some feelings about that she was ready to act on. 61 of 78 homeowners attended. The 17 who did not sent messages through neighbors expressing support. I presented the findings using a single-page summary August had prepared, clean and sourced, nothing asserted without documentation. Reserve fund trajectory, preferred community management and the Georgia Registry, $11,200 to Miriam's company, Foss Property Solutions and the $6,200 to her son, Georgia Code 143860, and what personal liability meant for a board member who had violated it, the regulatory complaint, and the Attorney General filing that had already been submitted. The room was quiet in the way that rooms go quiet when people understand they have been paying dues to fund someone's family income while being fined for wind chimes and lawn heights and backyard barbecues. Then Beatrice Osai spoke. She said, "She took my husband's wind chime." Said it without drama, in the same voice she used for everything, but in the quiet of that room it carried the full weight of what it meant. Then Raymond Cho, the one board member who had voted against the barbecue ban and against most of what Miriam had done in 7 months, stood up and said he had voted no on those measures because he had known something was wrong with the direction of the board, and he was sorry he had not done more sooner and he was doing more now. The room appreciated him for that. Then everyone spoke and we let it run. We voted. Formal recall petition under Crestfield Commons Governing Documents Section 5.4, requiring 67% of homeowners. 61 present, 59 signed. 76%. Filed Friday morning. Special election September 10th. Criminal referral to the Fulton County District Attorney filed simultaneously, 34 pages, fully sourced, organized by Irene. August held a second cookout. He announced it at the Thursday meeting as a community gathering to be held at Desmond's property on August 6th, on the back patio which was outside the HOA boundary, and therefore outside the jurisdiction of any enforcement action the current board might attempt. The room laughed, which was the right response because laughter was what the moment had earned after the weight of everything before it. The cookout happened. 112 people attended. Beatrice Osai brought the wind chime she had taken down and hung it on my fence post for the afternoon and left it there when she went home at the end of the day. I left it there for a week before returning it to her. She said, "I want it on my own porch." I said, "Then put it there." She said, "I will." She did. Miriam Foss resigned from the board by email on August 19th, citing personal health concerns and what she described as an untenable community environment that had made continued service impossible. August forwarded me the email. He said, "She resigned because the regulatory inquiry has become a formal investigation, and the Attorney General's office called her attorney last week." I said, "How do you know her attorney was called?" He said, "Because her attorney called mine to explore whether there was a settlement arrangement that could resolve the regulatory and criminal matters simultaneously." I said, "What did you tell them?" He said, "I told them the community would consider full restitution of all improperly paid funds plus legal fees as a starting point for any conversation, and that the criminal referral was with the district attorney's office and not ours to withdraw." He said, "They will call back." They did. September 10th, special election. Raymond Cho, president, the community's way of acknowledging that he had been right to vote no, and that being right when it was difficult counted for something. Irene Sandoval, treasurer, unanimous. Beatrice Osai, community liaison, a new position created specifically because the community had decided that someone whose job was to hear from residents and bring concerns forward before they became conflicts was worth having. Sylvia Dunmore, secretary, because she had attended every board meeting for 12 years, and there was no one who understood the history of the community better. First resolution. Full financial transparency policy. All contracts posted publicly within 5 days. All payments above $200 requiring dual authorization. monthly financial summaries on a community portal. Second resolution, formal rescission of the barbecue ban. Replaced with a reasonable fire safety guideline consistent with Harcourt Falls Municipal Code, which permitted open flame cooking on private residential property with standard safety precautions. Third resolution, dues reduction. Without the preferred community management payments and the FOSS Property Solutions payments, the actual operating cost of Crestfield Commons was lower than what Miriam had been spending. Monthly dues dropped from $210 to $175, $30 $5 per household monthly returned to 78 families going forward. The criminal case resolved in November. Miriam Foss, guilty plea to misdemeanor theft by deception under Georgia Code 1683. The prosecutor, having determined that the financial amounts and the first offense circumstances did not warrant felony prosecution, but that a misdemeanor conviction with full restitution and probation was appropriate and achievable given the documentation. Full restitution of $17,400, including all preferred community management payments and all FOSS Property Solutions payments. 12 months probation. Permanent prohibition from serving as officer of any Georgia HOA, nonprofit, or community association. Her son Daniel, misdemeanor fraud, restitution of $6,200, $6 months probation. He returned to Charlotte. Preferred Community Management LLC dissolved. FOSS Property Solutions LLC dissolved. The Georgia Secretary of State Registry was updated accordingly within 30 days. Civil recovery completed in December. Full restitution of $17,400 plus August's legal fees of $8,600, recovered through Miriam's homeowner's insurance, and a personal payment plan her attorney negotiated over 6 weeks. Reserve fund rebuilt to $89,000 by year's end, short of Gerald's $96,000, but recovering, projected to reach and exceed it within 8 months under Irene's management. My documented costs, the survey restamping, the certified mail, the cookout supplies that had become evidence in the broader story of what this community had been through and what it had decided to do about it, were covered through the civil judgment as attorney fees and related costs. August billed me for his time. It was fair. I paid it without discussion. A Georgia state representative from Fulton County introduced a bill in the fall legislative session. Georgia Residential Association, Financial Transparency and Member Protection Act. 3 provisions. Mandatory prepayment disclosure of all financial interests involving board officers or immediate family and vendors receiving HOA funds, filed with the county clerk as public record. Annual conflict of interest certifications from all board officers. Whistleblower protections for homeowners who report financial irregularities to state or county authorities. The bill passed committee in December. August called when the vote came through. He said the sponsor had noted in remarks that the legislation emerged from a situation in Harcourt Falls involving a backyard barbecue and a 14-foot property boundary. He said there was discussion of informal nomming. I said, name it after Beatrice's wind chime. He laughed. He said that is not how bill nomming works. I said it should be. He said I will pass that along. I do not know if he did. I know the bill passed and that is what matters. The Weber kettle is on the back patio. The propane smoker my son and I built from a kit is beside it. The cast iron griddle Renata gave me for my 48th birthday is on the shelf in the garage and comes out on Sunday mornings. The survey plat is framed in my home office, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that knowing where the lines are is not the same as knowing what the lines mean, and that understanding both is the kind of preparation that turns a fine for tire tracks into something much larger than a fine for tire tracks. Beatrice Osai's wind chime is on her front porch. I can hear it from my driveway on mornings when the wind comes from the south, which in Georgia in the spring is most mornings. It sounds the way it should sound, which is the sound of something that belongs where it is and is not going anywhere. That is the whole story. Thumbnail text options. Option 1. HOA banned MY barbecue. I found the exact boundary line. 100 people ate outside their reach. Option 2. Karen banned backyard grills. I checked the property survey. My cookout was 14 feet outside her power. Option 3. SHE banned all BBQs on the block. I threw a 100-person cookout. The law said SHE couldn't touch me.